Hello everyone, my name is Carrie, my pronouns are she, her, and welcome back to Carrie Plays Kerbal. In the last episode, we landed on the moons of Kerbin. For our first lander, we went to Minmus, the smaller, mintier moon. Then we set our sights on the Mun, with the Apollo-inspired Gemini 1 mission. In this episode, we'll be going further than any real human ever has, as we send a manned mission to Duna, the Kerbal system's analog of Mars. This will be quite the challenge for me because I've never done it before, but we choose to go to Duna in this episode and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. But before we go interplanetary, you join me as we touch down on the Mun once again, this time in the Gemini 2, essentially identical to the Gemini 1, but with the stronger landing legs and new seismometer experiment we just unlocked. Much like the Apollo program, the Gemini program has become something of a workhorse. While I don't want to bore you with the whole uninterrupted mission that is essentially the same as the last one we did, I wanted to go back to the Mun to land in its different biomes for more science points. As it turns out, I designed the Gemini lander with way more fuel than it needs to land just once and return home. It actually has enough delta V for multiple landings per mission, making it the perfect machine for gathering early game science by biome hopping around the Mun, which has 17 biomes. The Gemini 1 landed in just one of them, the Farside crater, but Gemini 2 has great success on our first multi-landing mission as it visits the East crater, then the Twin craters, then the East Farside crater, before finally rendezvousing with the command module in orbit and returning our brave Kerbals back home. This time we actually do it a bit more faithful to history by leaving the lander on a suborbital trajectory on the Mun, so that it will crash into its surface. Now that Jeb, Bill, and Bob are home once again, take a look at those beautiful science points. After unlocking some new parts, I decide to make this little rover, which we'll bring on the Gemini 3. Don't worry, this will be our final Mun mission for the episode, and I've cut out most of the trip as it's almost exactly the same. However, I am very happy to introduce to you the B team. Meet our new pair of pilots, Reed and Dodo Kerman, our new scientist, Courtney Kerman, and our new engineer, Seek Kerman. Seek will tell you that he's here against his will, but I advise you not listen to him. I wanted to have some more Kerbals that we can send on adventures while our main characters do the real groundbreaking work. These guys will probably be doing more of the grunt work. The rovers I made here are kind of useless, but so were the lunar roving vehicles that NASA brought on the later Apollo missions, which these are based on. This is really just a proof of concept that we can indeed put a drivable wheeled vehicle on another celestial body. Down the road I'd love to make some more fun and interesting rovers, but this is our first one. We had some difficulty getting them deployed because the chairs clipped into the lander, so I tried to use time warp to get it loose, but that just made this happen. Eventually it does free itself, and we proved that after building all these rockets, we can also build a glorified space car. After the Gemini 3 mission, I decided to make a larger rover design, the Nomad, essentially a solar-powered science truck. Right now its only purpose is to perform experiments in all the mini-biomes that comprise the Kerbal Space Center. The science per experiment is minimal, but after tediously performing each of them around every complex in the Space Center, it adds up to a decent lump sum. Maybe one of these days we'll actually send the Nomad to another world where it can have a more substantial goal. In this universe, I am now the undisputed queen of both spacecraft and electric vehicles, much to the chagrin of our space program's corporate nemesis Elon Kerman, who I'm sure is coping and seething in an office building somewhere. So now on to the main event to do something he never will, visit the Red Planet. I actually take the lander assembly from the Gemini program and just reuse it here, although slightly modified. This is kind of reflective of how some real space programs work. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? The main difference is that we attach some parachutes to it, because Duna will be the first body we visit that actually has an atmosphere. Although it's pretty tenuous, it is present enough that it can significantly slow down spacecraft. Parachutes alone won't get us touched down safely all the way, but they will get us most of the way. Here's actually what happens if you don't use enough of your engines to slow down, and try to rely on the thin Duna atmosphere alone. As you can see, not great. And once again I set up the old reliable asparagus staging, this time with 6 liquid rocket boosters, all feeding into each other. And I finally looked up how to use auto-strut, so now my rockets should stop wiggling themselves apart on takeoff. Up until now, whenever the rocket is ready, we just launch straight away, but because we're going interplanetary, I actually want to get us into a good transfer window. When you're going through deep space like this, the time to actually get to where you're going is a lot longer. So you can save a significant amount of time and fuel by making sure that the planets are aligned correctly. I used an online tool to just get the exact day that would be the most efficient, but you can also just do it by eye if you know the angles the planets are supposed to be at. For Duna, the angle should be about 45 degrees, meaning if you were to draw a line from Kerbin to the Sun to Duna, the angle it makes at the Sun would be 45. And now that we've lined up a proper transfer window, we're ready to take off. You all have seen me get to orbit enough by this point, so we'll just speed through this. And now that we are in a stable orbit, we set up our Trans-Duna insertion burn. We say goodbye to our home planet as we embark on the long journey. And then I start messing around a bit with maneuver nodes to try and get an encounter as close as possible. Because Duna has an atmosphere, we can actually use a technique called aerobraking. What you want to do is set yourself up so that you go just enough in the atmosphere that it slows you down and captures you, but not so low that you end up just crashing into it. Here's some examples of what not to do when aerobraking. I make sure I detach this stage here in such a way that it will end up crashing into Duna. That way we don't leave it floating around forever. The real Mars has been known to exist for a very long time, as you can see with the naked eye on Earth under certain conditions. The Babylonians and Egyptians tracked it as a wandering star, while the Romans named it after their god of war. However, serious Mars exploration couldn't begin until the space race. The Soviet Union attempted the first missions in 1960, but none of those actually made it past Earth orbit. The United States had its own failures as well, but in '65 the Mariner 4 became the first spacecraft to fly by Mars, and was able to send back some grainy photos. The Soviets did manage the first successful landing, with their craft Mars 3 in '71, though it transmitted for only 20 seconds before cutting out, which is a very Kerbal outcome. America followed up with the Viking 1 and 2 landers in '76, which sent back the first color images, and did some biological experiments to search for life. In the decades since, there's been dozens of orbiters and landers and rovers. Not all were successful. Mars has a long history of eating spacecraft, but the ones that made it really opened up a new world. Pathfinder and its tiny rover Sojourner in '97 proved that mobile science on another planet was possible. And of course there was Spirit and Opportunity that went there when I was a kid, which ended up lasting much longer than they were supposed to. F's in the chat for those guys, there's some real ones. Curiosity has been driving around since 2012, and most recently the Perseverance landed there in 2021, complete with a little drone helicopter, the Ingenuity. Despite no conclusive evidence for life, we have learned a lot about the planet. Dried up riverbeds, ice caps of frozen water, and an ancient past that may have been more hospitable to life. Of course, no human has set foot there yet, but I do believe we'll see that in our lifetimes. Personally, I don't see colonization within my life, but I am pretty sure we will get to see the first humans set foot on the planet, at least. Imagine what we could do if we just gave the entire military budget to NASA. It'd be like those memes of the futuristic cities with flying cars. And now we're ready to land. And finally, we've touched down on another planet for the first time. Bob gets out, runs all the experiments again, we plant our flag, I take some screenshots, and then Bill and Bob start setting up all the deployable science. I accidentally screwed up the placement of the second ladder, so they kinda just have to jump until they can grab onto it. And now I go back to the command module, and I get it into a low stable orbit, and there it will remain until we come up from the surface ready to go home. Once we're ready to go home, we take off and get ourselves into orbit, much the same as we do at the start of every mission off of Kerbin, although easier here, thanks to less air resistance. So here I am planning the docking for the two craft. I don't do this super efficiently, but we do get there eventually with more than enough fuel to get home, which is what matters in the end. I actually end up having a really hard time controlling the landing module. I believe it's a combination of not having a pilot and running out of RCS. I think it also has something to do with the fact that we don't have a direct connection to Kerbin right now. But not to worry, we switched to Jeb with control of the command module and we managed to dock just fine that way. Now we set up our return home. I actually end up getting this burn set up so precisely that it puts us on a path that goes inside Kerbin's atmosphere already. That way we don't even have to do anything else. As Jed, Bill, and Bob begin their long journey home through deep space, the B team is back on Kerbin testing my latest design. We've decided to branch out a bit and create our first aircraft, which we will use to fully chart the biomes of Kerbin itself. Enter the Aurora, a supersonic jet packed with science experiments. When designing the Aurora, I was heavily inspired by the SR-71 Blackbird, as I think these Mark II spaceplane parts just really lend themselves to that kind of sleek, low-profile look. The Blackbird was a Cold War-era spy plane that could travel over Mach 3. This was actually so ridiculously fast that the official strategy for evading missiles was to just accelerate and outrun them, which is pretty funny to me. To this day, it remains the fastest manned air-breathing aircraft ever. Of course, I took some creative liberties since this is my own original plane, but the SR-71 was certainly a blueprint. So our B-team pilots, Reed and Dodo, are on the runway, ready to take the Aurora on a test flight before her first real mission. A pretty sketchy takeoff, but they get her in the air, and quickly and easily shatter the sound barrier. Now our engineers specifically instructed the pilots not to get too trigger-happy with the throttle, but they just couldn't help themselves. Could you blame them? After reaching top speed and attempting to slow down from Mach 4, this happens. It appears the immense G-forces were just a bit too much for the poor Aurora to handle. Each pilot claimed that it was the other one's fault, so we may never know. However, after further investigation, it is determined that one of them probably accidentally bumped into the flight stick while reaching for snacks. Luckily, we had the foresight to equip this plane with emergency landing parachutes. After splashing down safely, Dodo decides to make the best of a bad situation and conduct their experiments here at least. So we collect science from this biome, Kerbin's waters. Well, after the unmitigated disaster that was the test flight, we decide to send our pilots on a longer, more important mission. A wonderful idea. Nothing can go wrong. This time, they'll make the Aurora live up to her namesake, as they are given the objective of reaching the geographic North Pole, and conducting experiments at Kerbin's northern ice shelf. Many explorers on Earth have tried to reach true north. While you may question why, as it seems like kind of a pointless goal, they would say, why not? It's the human spirit, I guess. And many people wanted to be the first to stand on the metaphorical top of the world. The first men who claimed to have made it there were American explorers Frederick Cook and Robert Peary. Peary had a background in engineering with the U.S. Navy, and Cook was a physician and anthropologist. And these two were actually in something of a pretty fierce rivalry to see who could make it first. By 1909, both claimed to have been the first one to the pole, although the evidence is pretty lacking, and academics these days consider both claims to be pretty dubious. It is possible that Peary may have come within 100 kilometers of the pole. It's also possible that his right-hand man, Matthew Henson, may have reached it while scouting ahead of the rest of the party. Whatever the case, of course none of these expeditions would have been possible without the survival techniques and traditions of the Inuit people who lived in and around the Arctic Circle since time immemorial. The first undisputed instance of humans reaching the pole was in 1926 when the crew of the airship Norga flew over it. But it wouldn't be until 1948 that a Soviet expedition finally set foot on the ice itself, after getting most of the way with planes. As Minmus and the Mun peek over the horizon, we begin our final approach. We dip below the clouds for the home stretch. I'm just navigating from the compass here, so you can tell we get there when the compass pulls a 180, and the camera gets a bit wonky. For whatever reason, something in the game's code, or like the way that it renders celestial bodies, really doesn't like the poles. It's like the game's confused about how to handle objects on the extreme points of the globe. In any case, we start killing off our speed and finally pull the parachutes. While you may call this cheating, I call it knowing one's abilities. Besides, do you really want these guys trying to properly land this thing after the last incident? I'd rather think smarter, not harder. We don't need these two turning themselves into a green stain on the ice cap. Finally, we run all the experiments from the ice shelf, and we have our Kerbals get out. Reed wanders a little farther from the Aurora to find the exact point, crunching through the snow and ice in silence. At first, it's just usual Arctic emptiness. Wind, the sun hanging low but never setting. Then he notices something strange. The ground looks thinner here. Almost like the ice isn't solid, but a texture stretched over nothing. He kneels down and brushes his glove over the snow, and the surface flickers. Gravity fails. Reality warps. and for an instant he sees through. There's no ice, no bedrock beneath Kerbin, just emptiness. The world is nothing but a shell, and under the shell there's nothing at all. It feels like he's not supposed to be looking at this, like he's found the edge of the stage, the fourth wall. He stumbles back, blinking, and suddenly, it's all gone. Just ice, just snow, just the endless daylight. Reed doesn't say anything to Dodo. He doesn't want to. But in the back of his mind, he knows now. Kerbin isn't a planet. It's a game. And someone else is playing. And then the sun begins to move. Not rising. Not falling. Just circling them. Endlessly. Tracing the horizon. Dawn without end. A spotlight following actors on a stage. He doesn't breathe. He can't tell if he's a god now, unshackled from the rules of this place, or if he's simply glimpsed a cursed truth of his universe. He doesn't speak on the return trip. He doesn't need to. And finally, our A-team returns home safely, as we undock the lander and it blows up spectacularly in the atmosphere on re-entry. Look at all that science. And that's all for today's episode. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed filming it. And I hope you'll join me next time. So remember to click like if you liked the video, hit subscribe if you want to see more, or I will put you on our next mission and reveal to you the cosmic horrors of the universe. Your choice.